and ask
No,
the
you need to
question.
be in. He needs to
Okay.
be looking at you.
Am I
And
going to
right here.
affect your
And
light
where
As
sitting
long as
here?
you're right there, you're very good.
Okay.
So, sir, if you can have a seat right there. Hi, I'm Dan.
Hi, Dan. I'm Craig.
Hey, Craig, watch your noggin.
Yep.
Adjust that for you once.
I brought this, but I don't think it matches. What do you think?
Well, that might be pretty busy on the screen, right? Here, I can put it. What do you think? I was
Just
holding
hold it
it
up to your.
so we could
sure.
see it.
Yeah, I think it look just his shirt open like that. I think
Yeah.
you need a tie. Then a little less formal.
You want me to
Conversational.
put it in my bag?
No, it's all right. I got it. Leave it there.
Okay.
Let me just hear you in your normal voice for a second.
Once upon a time,
That sounds
there
like
was a guitarist named Matt Chertkov.
That sounds like you.
He sounded like
It
a
is
guy
you.
named Stuart Chertkov.
It is you.
And
And
then,
you won't be back there when we go to record, right?
No.
If you stay tight to that side, without doing any movement. Well, actually, I'm seeing your shadow on the.
We'll get out of here.
Yeah, sorry about that.
How much time do I have to be back there?
Well, I am ready whenever these guys are ready.
Okay, so I'll just get out. I'll get my coffee and get out of the picture.
Okay, get out. Make like an egg and blow. I mean, make like a leaf and beat it. A combination of the.
Matt, how long is this interview?
I'm thinking about 20 minutes. It depends on what you have to say about Houston. The good thing is I have a bunch of categories, like the blues in the music. So in other words, in the documentary, it could be like blues, place, and music. Then Houston talks. Then Craig Handy talks. Then Jerry. So in other
Oh, I
words,
see. You're gonna cut back and forth. I
Yeah.
got
So
you.
there's some general. There.
You
Yeah.
have
You're
a
just.
glass cleaner. This is a little foggy.
You're talking
I
head.
have glass cleaners. Would you like?
Yeah, that would be great. Just a little.
You did with that.
I don't want to come off as being unclear.
Keep your interview in focus.
Keep my interview exactly. I don't want to wander. Well, look at that. You guys built a set of tracks.
Yeah.
Man, that's cool.
This is a professional operation.
Very nice. That's homemade, right?
No, it's actually parts of it are an actual rig that you can buy to
Okay.
do this, and then the rest of it you kind of jerry rig.
You check that out.
What? Oh.
Thanks. That's the.
All right, so now
That's the
did
stuff that makes
make
you look
that
really cool.
yourself?
I wish I could take credit for it, but no.
Okay. That's a really nice, simple one, though.
Yeah, that was
Actually,
that.
I made it.
Did you make it?
No.
I only ask because I have a couple of friends that are documentary guys, and they're always making those things.
I imagine if you need a lot of them, that's fine.
Yeah. But that's pretty slick.
I don't know why, but when wheels turn and they're quiet and smooth, I get excited. I don't know what it is about that. But
When
That
you're
is pretty-
filming, man, that's
Well,
it
you know,
means the
and that
world.
now we're talking like really high quality bearings.
right, exactly.
You know. That's what's going on there.
You know, you got me at high quality bearings.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Matt, whenever you're ready, we're good.
All right. So Craig, so Craig, I have these about 12 different areas to ask you. Do you want to get into that first, or do you want to get into like testimony about Houston first?
You can do the other, whatever you want to do.
Get you loose first. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Get your hardcore questions in there while I'm fresh.
Okay. Okay, all right, I think we are ready.
Where is this going to be cropped from, roughly?
That shot's kind of a waist up, yeah, and this one's more tight on your face.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay, so I just ask and you talk, okay?
We got some intro music.
Craig
Oh yeah,
Andy,
we got to turn our phones off.
Yeah.
Good.
Craig
Or
Andy,
on vibrate,
greatest
on
saxophonist
stun.
in jazz today.
I'm
Lives
going
in
to put
Weehawken.
mine on airplane mode. Suzanne, you're going to have to turn your phone off.
It's
Or-
off.
Is it
your
airplane
ringer
mode
off.
necessary or
It's off.
just,
No, just, put it on vibrate or
okay,
just so it doesn't ring.
okay. Okay, Craig, I'm gonna ask, this is a two-part question, I can ask them separately. What is music's place in society and what are musicians? So first, what are musicians' place in society that you feel?
Musicians' place in society. Well, I suppose traditionally musicians were meant to entertain people primarily, but not just entertain. Maybe that was like the middle part. If you go back to really traditional communities, music evolved as part of the daily life ritual. So music was used to mark ceremonial things like weddings, birthdays, any kinds of the harvest, any kinds of community activities. So musicians would have been part of that array and that sequence of events. So I suppose it evolved from that into more of an entertainment thing in the Middle Ages, and then now it's a little bit of both.
What is music's place in society?
Woof. That's it's a really deep question. Different people like music for different things. Some people like it for entertainment. Some people like it for background, like for shopping or elevators. Some people like it for actually going out to dance. Some people like it for more of an intellectual sort of stimulation, like going to a museum and hearing something that's a little bit more challenging. So I guess it depends on who you are, more than what music is, because it's subjective.
What is your music's place in society or point?
Well, that again, can't narrow it down to one kind of music I play, I suppose. So it would range from something that I would want people to be challenged by to, something that I want people just to feel good, and, everything in between.
Do you feel that politics has a place in music?
Well, I feel that people can address political issues or social issues with music. I don't think politics necessarily has a place in music. Although, Chairman Mao might have disagreed with me about that. But yeah, so I come from America, so I have a completely different outlook on it. I don't think politics is the governing factor of what you should do with your music and the message that you're supposed to, support. Propaganda ideas. No, I don't think that's what music is primarily for.
Do you think that your music can change society? Do you think music changes society?
I think that there have been times when music has brought together and coalesced the feeling, that the sentiment that societies have felt at a particular time, and it has expressed that moment in time. I know that there's some obvious examples which I can't think of right now, but when I was growing up, James Brown recorded "I'm Black and I'm Proud," and I remember hearing that on the stereo and at friends' houses and in my house. My dad played that, and that resonated with me because that meant something to me. And that was a time we were coming out of the time when the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act had just been signed. So that was still a very important time for black people in America to claim their identity. So yeah, there's definitely a connection.
Okay, great. How has music changed over time? Like, 60s, 70s, 80s. In your lifetime as a performer, how has music changed?
Well, that's a very good question. Interesting question. I think that about every 10 years, there is something that's introduced in music, whether it's a technology or just a usage of harmony or rhythm, something becomes popular. Um, like if you look at the 1940s, for example, you had the big bands were still ruling the airways, and that was popular music, and people used to dance to that. In the 1950s, the sound changed, and it became a little bit more about, it was still dance music, but, toward the later 50s, you had the advent of the electric guitar coming in, and that changed music, and that was a precursor to rock and roll. So, in the 50s, you had what they call rhythm and blues coming in. So you had in the 30s and 40s, you had more swing, and then 50s, you had the rhythm and blues, and then at the end of that was the beginning of rock and roll. And even in the 70s, you had more expansive, you had Jimi Hendrix, you had people doing more fusion with jazz and rock and roll. And in the 80s, everything changed with Devo. It was the advent of the DX7. The Yamaha DX7 came on, and it was like, oh, we can make a terrible sample of a saxophone with or horn section or brass section with this keyboard. But you heard that everywhere in music. So sometimes it's technology driven, and sometimes it is it's just an evolutionary process where people have been experimenting with a new thing, and it just turns into something else. So I'd say every 10 years, music changes in some noticeable form or fashion.
What about the jazz scene specifically in the last 25, 30 years? What changes have you noticed?
It's moved further and further away from dance music, I think, with every generation that comes along. And so I'm not going to get the dates exactly right, but roughly, I don't know, somewhere between the last 10 and 20 years, straight eighth jazz became very popular among a younger, college age crowd. And everything kind of gravitated toward that sound, and also odd time meters. And that's all great. And I don't have a problem with any of that. I think it's just important to know why you're doing something. And so if you are doing something because you can do it because it sounds difficult or it sounds tricky, but there's no other reason, then it's hard for me to get into it just as a intellectual exercise. I come from a background, I think, that's a little bit more firmly rooted in the idea that something, if it swings for a reason, and that's because people like to dance. And people like to move to music. So it should have something reminiscent of that to me. But that's one of the things that's changed in the last, whatever you said, 20 or 25 years. And again, it's not a bad thing. There are older musicians than myself that play that style of music very well. But they also came from the dance tradition, and they played, with people that performed for parties, live rooms of people that were actually dancing to jazz or to a backbeat, so to speak, with a rhythm and blues. So they understand what it is that the music is supposed to be doing, serving a function, right? If it's merely, an experimental thing and it's just supposed to be something that is, done because somebody thought of a new way to, cook an egg, so to speak, it can be interesting, and that can have an influence on, later movements and directions of music. But yeah, I'm trying to think of what else has happened. It's also gone. It's also gone the other way because now, there was a point when, Wynton Marsalis came on the scene in the 1980s, and he brought back, more of a feeling of traditional values in the music, and that persisted through the 90s. And I think now it's like there's sort of a turning, which has gone back with younger musicians are starting to embrace that more traditional style as well. So it's gone both ways.
All right, those are great answers. Let's get some sound bites of boiled down, like that if you feel they've taken the blues out, or they've taken church out, or they've taken the dance element out, or they've taken soul. Like, okay, so how is music changed recently today in jazz?
Well, jazz has been evolving constantly, and one of the things that's happened since the dance era from the mid 20th century is that they've taken some of the dance elements have been removed and replaced with more sophisticated rhythmic and harmonic structures, and that's part of that's, well, I don't know. You can edit after that.
Okay.
Matt, if I may have one question pertaining to the things you said. Do you find any difference in the jazz scene regionally? I guess the question I'm saying is, having been a non-jazz musician, blues musician, hanging on a jazz scene in West Orange and Montclair, then when I traveled with some other bands, I came into like Alabama and the Carolinas and ran into jazz musicians there, and I personally found there to be a totally different vibe from those musicians than up here. I'd love you to speak to that if you find any.
Another thing that's happened in the past 20 years is that in New York, primarily, where I live, I've seen jazz clubs sort of start to, one by one, disappear. So the scene that used to be very vibrant and thriving in New York City has become less so. And that, part of it's like I don't go out as much, so I don't hang out as much as I used to when I was younger. But part of that's because there's just less places to go and less places to hear live jazz. And there was also more diversity before, the last 20 years. There was like what they used to call third stream. There were the cats that the loft scene was the jam session scene. You had more traditional guys, in different parts of town would have different types of music, the East Village was like starting to get more toward the avant-garde, the more you got uptown, the more traditional it was with the organ houses. So like that scene is not quite as strong as it used to be. And I know for a fact that has happened across the country as well, because, the clubs that used to be available to play when you wanted to tour all the way from New York City all the way to Los Angeles or San Francisco, a lot of those places have closed, and you don't have that circuit anymore. I was talking to Todd Barkin recently, and he mentioned that Jack Whittemore was the guy who really kind of strung a lot of that together, throughout the, probably somewhere in the 60s to the 90s, But yeah, so that's had a deep effect on the music as well.
So Jack Whittemore, he was an agent that had a string of clubs or would put people across the country?
He was a guy who put the circuits together. and he had a deep connection with all the musicians. So, and they respected him and they loved him, and so it went both ways.
One other thing, earlier you mentioned straight eight music. Could you explain to the non-musician what you meant by that, so maybe we could insert that
Sure.
if necessary?
The straight eighth rhythm, as opposed to the swing rhythm, straight eighth meaning that the eighth notes are not swung. So, in a more traditional sense, the eighth notes have more of a feeling like a triplet. So if you take 4 quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and that's the straight eighth. It's more straight up and down. Where the traditional value of the eighth notes is more of a triplet, so it's bumbo do double do double do don't do don't do don't do don't. Somebody's skipping, like a child skipping. So that's more the swing feel. And the straight eighth is somebody who can't skip. They just jump straight up and down. Get don't oompa loompa.
Okay. Does the specific saxophone you play matter?
Sorry, does the specific?
Does the specific saxophone you play matter that much?
You mean the brand?
The brand or the individual horn?
Well, sure, it's part of your voice. So anything you change is going to have an effect on how you sound and how you feel. But the most important thing is if you're comfortable. If you're comfortable, expressing yourself is a lot easier. It's like putting on a suit and trying to go run a 400-meter dash. It's not going to work out too well. But if you're comfortable, you can express yourself better. So yeah, it's going to definitely have an effect.
Has the internet made your job different any way as a musician or to promote yourself?
Oh, for sure. The internet has changed life on planet Earth as we know it, in good and bad ways. The problem with the internet is that it's kind of a job in itself to actually keep a presence and keep a daily presence and do all the house cleaning and advert every single gig that you have coming up or any event that you have. So I liken it to movie stars. They have people to do that. They hire people to do that. Jazz musicians can't necessarily afford to do that, so then they have to learn how to do that. And that definitely probably leads an advantage to the younger musicians who have more energy, for one, and who are also coming up with that as the norm. So they're not really thinking about not doing that because everybody else is doing that. For them, it's normal. For a guy my age, it's like, I say, I'll do it tomorrow, and a year goes by and, still doing it tomorrow. So it certainly has an effect on how much time you spend, like, actually learning music. But depending on the kind of music you play, if you're a Justin Bieber type guy, then you can do really well with it.
Great answer. Dean, what's there's like that's coming on and off.
Yeah, that's the.
Is that on the sound, Dan? Do you think we're cool?
It's going to be there in the background. Is that probably your heat coming out?
No, that's actually the. It's a dehumidifier. I can get in there and turn it off. There's also a fan on in the laundry room. Are you catching that one?
I don't hear that, but I
Okay.
hear this loud.
You want me to go turn that off? Also, as an answer to, or as a follow-up to what you just said, since so many of the young musicians, the norm is all that digital stuff, what do you think is the direct or indirect effect on the music individually as a musician and then ultimately as the music? Because the musicians make up the music. So if they're suffering, you know what I mean?
Well, one of the other problems.
Should I fix
Yeah.
that?
I'll tell you what, take a listen. I don't.
It's off right now.
And you know what?
I thought it was on.
When we record in here,
Dean, one sec. I think it's on right now.
Oh,
It is
you
on.
you recorded it when it was on, right? That's
I'm just saying that I don't think it's really picking up in there, Matt, that much.
Okay,
Like, that mic's
I'm
pretty-
hearing but I think that's just room tone, right?
Yeah.
So
well. There was another thing that was
Well,
on
I'm gonna
earlier,
defer to Dan, definitely.
right? I mean, but I just heard something go off though.
Well, that's
Right
what
before-
it is, but he's saying, I'm not
it
hearing
comes
that
on and off
specific-
because
Right.
it's a dehumidifier. So I
Right.
guess it's feeling. But normally when we record in here with like real hot mics, it doesn't pick that up.
Oh, okay.
But we're recording band. Okay, I think we're all right. If Dan
That's
says
true.
it's
We're
okay.
recording.
Dan
Yeah,
says
you got a lot more. We're also there's gonna be play some music underneath it, and we'll get some room tone of the room with it on, just so you can.
Okay.
We gotta get it.
You can always just loop it too. You can record it and keep it on, put it
Right,
under.
yeah, that's, our, same thing, our name for that is room tone,
Room tone, okay.
so that, if it turns off, and it sounds weird with it being off, then you can add it in.
You just put it
Right.
underneath it.
Yeah,
You
just
just-
record
right.
without anybody talking.
Sure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Call it room tone.
So are you checking for Anthony? Because I think,
I got my phone, but you want to start asking Houston questions.
yeah, I think this is gonna go to about 2:15. I think
That's fine.
40 minutes is like enough, but not, not just a half an hour. Crazy.
If he can answer that last one.
Yeah. Another thing that the internet has done, it's created, and this is a societal problem, not just a musician problem. It's sort of undermined our attention spans. And what ends up happening is that, in order to grab the person that's on the internet, you have to be splashy and fast. And so now I see a lot of younger musicians posting things that are just that. And it's like they play everything they just learned in the last, 2 weeks. And it's impressive. And then it's like, okay, and then where's the love? Where's the story? Where's the hook? And it kind of creates this addiction where all you want to do is just see more of that, and you need higher, louder, faster, and it just keeps going and going and going, and pretty soon, you either, you end up spending like 2 weeks on the internet without sleeping or eating, or, you just turn your phone off, which is sadly where I'm at right now.
How does music make you feel?
I think that music makes you feel however you want to feel based on what you're listening to. If you're in a sort of blue mood, you'll listen to something, sweet, like kind of blue, or something more wistful. And if you're in a really happy mood, you'll listen to something more upbeat. I think it's just a question of, what mood you're in to begin with and what you're looking for.
What other kinds of music besides jazz influence you, or do you like?
Wow, well, that's a hard question. How much time you got? I think, so I grew up in the 60s and 70s, so I listened to the radio during that time. So, in my house, Sundays was classical day, classical music, European composers primarily, orchestral music. That's when I fell in love with Prokofiev and Ravel. Then, the rest of the time was split between jazz, the big bands were still a favorite of my parents, so they listened to Fletcher Henderson and Duke Ellington and Count Basie, but also, the small group jazz and the trio with Red Garland, Monk, Train, all the usual suspects, Dizzy Gillespie. But then, like I said, I grew up listening to, Stevie Wonder and Parliament Funkadelic, James Brown, Marvin Gaye, R&B, popular music from, Carpenters, in the 70s you could hear everything on AM radio, basically. You'd hear Fletcher Henderson, and then you hear, Karen Carpenter, like right back, next to each other, and then you'd hear Jimi Hendrix and, Johnny Mathis right next to each other or something, that was the beautiful thing about that era. People weren't so demographically specific, but marketing hadn't really gotten a hold of radio as we know it today.
What do you think about today's music?
What kind of music? Which music?
Just the music of today.
Well, that's an interesting question. There's a lot of ways to interpret that. I will say I'm going to go on a really off the beaten trail here. One thing that's happened over the last several years is that the pitch has been going up. If you look at the pitch from the mid 20th century, it was A440. Now it's A444 and 445 in Europe and Japan. The Japanese have been actually primarily responsible for moving the pitch up orchestrally. So, you know, I don't know if you've noticed when you go to Europe and you're tuning up to the piano, it's like, whoa, got to tighten the strings a little bit more. You know, it's 442, at least in Europe, is the bottom number. But that's not just something that happens with musical instruments. It's like the vibrational frequency of us as people has risen as well. So we're a little bit more like, you know, and we're a little less calm and steady than we used to be. We're getting faster and, you know, not spending as much time with the fundamentals, I guess, and we're looking for, you know, more short-term gratification, it feels like, with marketing and just society in general.
Great answer. What's the relationship or the place of blues and jazz?
Well, it's the foundation of jazz, I would say. Blues is kind of where, before there was jazz, there was blues. So it's a building block of jazz.
How about just say, give me an answer, blues is the foundation of jazz?
Okay.
That was great, but you know, I'm thinking of snippets. Like,
Okay. I mean, it's going to be weird, though, if you just cut to, like, blues is the foundation of jazz. Boom. You know?
We'll see.
Okay. Blues is the foundation of jazz.
Okay. Okay, I know that's kind of...
How'd I do?
You passed the audition.
Yes.
All right. What do you think about touring and that lifestyle? Goes with it.
Whew. Well, there's all sorts of different ways to tour, as you know. There's first class and then there's steerage. But yeah, in general, it's great to travel, period. You know, I think every musician, no matter what kind of music you play, that has traveled has been enriched by that experience. I can't say enough about, you know, having a passport. You know, I think I'm just going to say Americans, you know, get a passport, go somewhere every year, you know, challenge yourself, get outside of your comfort zone, because without that, you don't see, you know, different perspectives, how different people look at things, how people look at you, where you come from, and the rest of the world. So that's important, to look at yourself through other people's eyes as well. I think to see where you fit in, you know, the entire picture of humanity, but also just to enrich your own life, you know, and to, you know, get another perspective, eat different flavors with different foods, you know, just it's very enriching to travel. So I highly recommend it. The other problem with it is it can be exhausting when you're a musician and you're traveling, you know, the schedules, you know. When I started, the schedules are not so tight, you know. Then somewhere in the mid-90s or somewhere, you know, things started to shift a little bit, or I should say probably early 2000s, and promoters were more focused on getting the maximum amount of product for their time and their money, you know. So it's become more difficult because, you know, you end up spending less time in places.
How about like a short answer about, and that was great. No, that was great. Just a short answer on like the rigors of touring, how hard it is.
Touring has become more rigorous over the years with the advent of, you know, promoters and concert presenters becoming more focused on the bottom line than being happy about presenting like their part of the world to you and wanting to take you around and take you out and show you things, you know. That one sucked.
Matt, I suggest you start getting into the Houston questions now.
Yeah, I'm gonna get there in about 5 minutes. I just have these.
Does everybody say the same thing?
We don't know yet. You know? We don't know yet.
If you give all the answers, you can do the interview.
Yeah. All right. So I got about 4 more things.
Okay.
We'll get about a minute into each, and then we'll do about 10 minutes of Houston testimony. Then Anthony will have 40 minutes.
It's plenty of time for
Yeah.
me. No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm just saying I want to make sure you have enough time in case
Yes.
something blossoms in the Houston story.
That's a good point. Yeah. Okay. So talk about recording and how has it just recording and how has it changed also. Those are two questions.
Well, I'll start with the second half. It's changed a lot because of the technology that's involved in recording. We used to record directly to tape, and if you made a mistake, the engineer had to splice the tape with a razor blade and put tape on it, bring it together and tape it up. So obviously there's a lot more mistakes now because people are not under that pressure to not make mistakes. And Pro Tools allows you to just cut and paste as you like. So the recording process has been really influenced heavily by computers, coming into the picture. And the problem with that is that, music sounds less organic as a result because you can wipe all the intonation problems away. You can, quantize all the beats. Everything sounds very homogeneous. And music didn't start off that way. So it's become very much, computer sounding. And that's a big problem, with the younger generation and also just in general. And as far as recording goes, it's like Sonny Rollins said he hated recording, And I used to think, wow, why does he hate recording? It's great to, otherwise I wouldn't be able to know as much as I know about Sonny Rollins if I didn't have those recordings. But on the other side, I understand it now. It's because it tends to, it influences the way you play when you're thinking about recording, but it also, and that's a big thing because it takes you out of the moment. And I think that one of the most beautiful things about playing jazz is that, or any music that's creative, is that once you become in the moment, you reach a point where you're at a parity with the vibrational frequencies that are going on around you. So whatever's happening is your telling of that story in that moment, and that's probably the hardest thing to do in playing music. I think is to really just not be influenced by anything other than actually what is really happening at that moment. And so recording tends to diffuse or dilute some of that.
In a couple senses.
He didn't like that answer.
No, it's all great. It's great.
I loved it.
In a couple senses, what's your philosophy or your modus operandi of recording, or what do you, when you go in a studio, what for you, what are you trying to capture? What's your thought in your recording process with your band or with?
Wow, that's that's a surprisingly hard question for me to answer. I'm trying to get the composition documented, first and foremost. And then I'm also trying to get into a space where I can just be in the moment. And don't get me wrong, studios are great, separation is great, but it's really antiseptic. And it's very difficult to actually access the moment because the moment is very sterile. And that's what performance brings when there are other people in the room and you're feeding off the energy. Because one of the biggest things you have to keep in mind about performing is that the audience is equally a part of the performance as the artists are in creative music. So without that energy flow, and that loop and that circle of energy, now you just have the band in the studio and it's just half of that energy, and they're feeding off of each other, but they're also in different rooms, and, it's like it's almost like you're blind, you can hear everything, but you can't necessarily see and feel and create a moment. So it's actually very difficult, I think, to really to really say something authentic in that moment. You can kind of fake it with a lot of stuff that you've been practicing or working on, but you have to rely on on your technique or your, that part of your toolkit to, tell the story, and that's not necessarily authentic.
May I interject with one? So if you had the opportunity to go into a studio today with just your band in a live setting with tape with a couple ribbon mics, is that something that would excite you? Have you done that in the past?
Have we done that? I don't think so.
Not really, we haven't tried that approach.
No. Yeah, that would.
It would?
That would be very
Alright.
cool. Yeah.
Put that on the list.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, one or two more questions before we get into Houston. Talk about the Newark jazz scene, if it has any importance to you or what you know of the Newark jazz scene.
The Newark jazz
Yeah,
scene?
the New York, New Jersey.
Oh, the Newark, New Jersey. I thought you were saying North Sea, and I'm like, wow, I haven't been to North Sea in a while. I don't really know that much about the Newark jazz scene per se. What I recollect was, like Larry Young, other organists that were on the scene then, but I don't, I didn't grow up in New Jersey, and so what I have is the remnants of that, But I know it was a hard grooving, hard swinging, and a little experimental, but just like very much like comfort food.
All right, how about a concise one or two?
Well,
No, this is great. I'm just trying to get sound bites.
Where did you grow up? Craig?
I grew up in Oakland, California.
Oakland, California. I think you should, if you can get that in.
Okay, that'll be in a second. So just like if I asked you about the Newark jazz scene, you say it has a reputation for being, hard grooving, greasy organ test, something just like a
Sure.
Newark jazz scene.
The Newark jazz scene has a reputation for being hard grooving, swinging, organ centric, just really, like comfort food.
That was great. Can you give me one more take of that? Just because I think that might be in there. So just give me another take.
The Newark jazz scene has a reputation for being a hard swinging, hard grooving, organ centric sound that is sure to swing you.
Okay. All right. So I get one or two more. I want to talk about sound and melody, and then we're going to get into pure Houston stuff. All right, saxophone is sound. How important is that?
How important is saxophone
Yeah,
and
talk
sound?
about the sound of saxophone.
How important?
The importance of it, or
The importance of one's sound on their saxophone, or
Yes.
just in general?
just in general, the saxophone sound, like the sound. What's the importance of that?
As it relates to the entire scope of the music history of the
No,
world?
not
Or?
the history, just like if we're on a gig, like the importance of your sound, the importance of the sax sound.
Well, the importance of any sound, from any instrument is tremendously important, whether it's a guitar or, trumpet or trombone or a saxophone, because your sound is your signature. Your sound is basically moving molecules and vibrations through the air, right? It's all about energy. So if you don't have a good sound on any instrument, then you're not going to have a good result, with the people you're trying to reach, because, human beings are like antennas, right? We feel what's around us, the energy and what we hear and what we smell and what we see. So, yeah, sound is tremendously important.
Dan, is that going to be on the wall?
It'll be there. I mean, it's not
Okay.
going to overpower it, but
I think we might have to do, because that's a really good one. We might have to do that one again. So I want to ask you about that and repertoire, and then we're going to get into just Houston. And this is all great, Craig, so it's great. When I'm asking you for like a little snippet, it's just because I'm saying like what, you know what I mean? It's not because your answer's not great. It's just
You need it concise.
possibly, but then again, he's giving great answers, so I don't know. What's the importance of repertoire, maybe standard repertoire standards?
Oh, the American Songbook is what I grew up on too. So it's like asking somebody from Cuba, it's like, what's the importance of rice and beans? I don't mean that derogatorily at all. I just mean that that's like anybody that eats a staple food, it's hard to ask them what the importance of that is for their diet, for their community. So for my community, particularly, jazz musicians, it was incredibly important because that was the compulsory element that you had to, if not master, at least attempt to master in order to, achieve any kind of success in your ability to tell a story.
All right, let's go one more time. What you said was great, but Dean was upstairs, so we could kind of hear.
Oh, you can hear when I'm walking. All right. Well, Anthony's here. I'm sorry.
Okay.
He's waiting outside.
Okay. Yeah, we got about 10 minutes more. Okay. Okay.
Ask me again.
So the importance of sound, like a specific, like your saxophone sound, or the importance of someone's sound.
Yeah, the importance of sound is universal. Any instrument you play, whether it's your voice or piano or brass instrument, guitar or saxophone, it is your signature. When I answer the phone, I know it's you because I know that's your sound. You sound like Matt. So that's incredibly important, and tone is everything because it's vibrational frequency moved through the air, and human beings are antennas, and they're wired to receive all this information, whether it's through their five senses or a sixth sense. But sound is coming through the ears, and that's a very important sense that we have developed, and so you've got to develop your sound.
Quick question: who do you think it's more important to reach with your music? A musician or a non-musician, or is there any distinction? Or
I don't know if there's a distinction when you're trying to reach musicians versus non-musicians, because at that point you're just in it. You're really trying to open yourself up to whatever it is that you connect to when you're performing, and basically the best way to describe it for me is getting out of the way of yourself, because as soon as you forget about what you're wearing, what you smell like, what you look like, all that stuff, the music starts to happen.
Great.
Great
Okay.
answer.
So that's all great. So let's get down to whatever we can get about Houston now. Okay. So how to get the testimony?
when was the first time you heard Houston Person play?
Okay. Well, in that case, it's not. If you don't have specific, let's just get to like what's special about Houston Persons playing.
Wow, everything is special about Houston Persons playing. It's like when you talk about a master of, impressionist painting, it's like you've got to basically start at the beginning. So with Houston, if you want to learn how to phrase a melody, like in the American songbook tradition, you listen to Houston Person. If you want to learn about how to imply the blues over standards, you listen to Houston Person. If you want to learn about how to use rhythm to help you tell a story, you listen to Houston Person. If you want to understand how important it is to have a good tone and a good, strong sound, you listen to Houston Person. If you want to become a really good businessman or woman, you talk to Houston Person. Houston is like the go-to for everything that you need to understand about the music business from both sides, from music side and the business side.
Great. That was awesome.
I'm giving you your sound bites, man. I'm just like, I'm learning, man. I'm learning.
yeah, it's awesome.
Hang on a second.
Yeah, we should have done Houston first, but we'll get Anthony in. He can get 40 minutes. Okay, so what is it about Houston's sound that's special to you?
It's dripping with the blues. I don't know how to describe it. There's something in the water in the South, and I know, we always think of the Texas tenor as the woof sound, but Houston can bark. He's a big dog, and he's got a big bark, and there's something about being able to make that part of who you are, you know. And I wish I knew more about South Carolina, where he came from, in Florence. But there's something, you know, there's something that's very particular about, you know, a lot of horn players that come from the South and just have a big sound, and they got a lot of bark.
Great. What do you like about the way Houston plays the blues?
Oof. Well, it's essential, and by that I mean that, you know, his sound is influenced by the black church. Whether he was directly involved in it, I don't remember, but it was something. It's like being in a place where you grow up, where, you know, you just smell lavender all day long, right? That is going to be something that whenever you speak, lavender is just going to come out. So I'm imagining that where he grew up, people were very bluesy, you know, because it is just authentic, and it is really swinging, and it's like, I mean, he sounds to me like Jimi Hendrix. If he had played, you know, saxophone, Jimmy would have started off sounding like Houston, you know, because he's able to, like, make those notes bleed, you know.
How about, do you think there will, after Houston's era, is it possible for a young or even an older but younger than Houston musician to have that same sound and phrasing and timing? Is that a lost thing that we need to learn from? Or is it, I mean, I had a chance to play one gig with Big J McNeely, and he was in a wheelchair. I'm like, how's this guy going to play this gig? I'm thinking, and he got up there, and he couldn't blow like his records, but he'd hit one note, and it was like alien. I was like, how are you getting that timing and phrasing? You just blew everything open with one note. And it was like he couldn't do all his stuff, but
Right.
he still had that. Can we get that? Is that you know what I'm getting at? Is that lost?
You want to ask that
Okay.
on camera?
Is what Houston encapsulates in his sound and playing, is that going to be lost when he passes away, or can young musicians develop that?
That's a really hard question to answer. My guess is that it's gonna happen, but I don't know how. It's gonna be somebody that grows up, you know, in a small town and is living a very authentic life and is connected to the land and their ancestry and their community. Those are the things that were present when Houston was formed, you know, and I think those are the things, some of the criteria at least, that are going to be necessary to get somebody of that caliber. But it's also coming from, you know, the experiences that they had, and that is going to be really hard to replace. So I don't know.
What is it like hearing Houston person play live, like in the audience?
It's a very satisfying experience. It's, you know, he plays pretty and mean at the same time, and you know, it's beautiful, the sound that's coming out of his horn. And, you know, I love when he does, you know, the Black Baptist Church hollers and shouts, you know. So yeah, it's just something, for me, it's very comforting.
Where do you think Houston person's place in saxophone lineage is?
Wow, that's a good question, and that's a little outside of my expertise, but you know, he comes from the great blues tradition of people that played, you know, saxophone, like Lucky Thompson from Texas, and you know, even Billy Harper, but you know, I don't know. I just don't know enough about South Carolina, you know, because that had a huge impact on the way, you know, he developed. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely heavily blues influenced, you know, as opposed to coming from the more intellectual side of the music. But it doesn't mean that he doesn't understand that. It just means he you know, likes to play in that side of the field.
What is it about Houston when he plays a melody?
He interprets, to me, and this is something that all great musicians do. He has that ability to interpret a melody like a singer would. And that's something that you only get from playing with great singers and being around great singers. And that's really a lost art form, because everybody can read the melody from the real book, but it's really hard to really speak that truth that you get when you hear a great singer, like a great blues singer or a great jazz singer, really lay it on the line and leave nothing, you know, everything is left on the field.
Matt, maybe ask if Houston has any living peers, in your opinion, like, you know, equals or.
Does Houston have any living peers or people that you think are play like in his general?
Well, I would say Billy Harper is similar. He's a little younger, but he's in that sort of deep Southern tradition of having the blues coming through everything they play. You know, Jimmy Heath sadly passed not too long ago. There's, you know, Houston's like one of the last of his kind.
All right. Before you go, maybe a couple more blurbs about how great Houston is. What can we come at it from a couple? How great is Houston person?
Well, I mean, I did the whole, you know, if you want to learn this, you listen to Houston Purple. I think that's going to be your go-to,
That was
man.
the money shot.
There's the money shot.
Okay.
Well, and you can answer this towards Matt. Someone watching this documentary, what would you want them to know about Houston?
Someone watching this documentary, what do you want them to know about Houston or what he represents?
I think that Houston's the kind of person that you'd love to sit down and have a meal with. He has a great personality. He has a great warmth and empathy for human beings. He has a great compassion that you feel, and he has a great love that you feel. And that extends to the music as well as, you know, the people he's with, you know. But on the music side, you know, it's like everything that you need to learn if you're starting out learning how to play, you know, Houston can teach you, you know, by listening to his recordings. And even for guys like me, you know, it's like I have to constantly refer back to, you know, somebody like Houston to ground me, you know, because it's important to understand where you come from. And that's an important thing about jazz, as we know it. It comes from somewhere. And if you don't understand where the music comes from, then you don't understand where you're at in your current situation with how you relate to what's going on. And if you don't understand that, then you can't understand where you're going in the future. So, you know, Houston is like the touchstone. You know, he's the guy, he's the culture bearer. You really have to understand it from that perspective and then just let it in.
So do you think anything else we get, because we got to get anything in?
It was great. Great interview.
Yes,
Thank you.
incredible.
What about Eddie Shaw? He would be close to Houston.
Oh yeah, you know Eddie Shaw. I played with Eddie Shaw. Yeah.
Okay.
Great blues
Did you know Eddie?
saxophonist.
I didn't.
He played with Howlin' Wolf for many
Yeah.
years.
Oh,
Magic
okay.
Sam.
So last question. What about listening to a Houston person recording?
Didn't I just answer that?
You did, but I'm just trying to get different versions of the same thing. Just
I see.
'cause what you're saying.
You
is
want the
incredible.
second version of the
Yeah,
chord?
I mean, what you're saying, it's like you gave me a great song. Now just rewrite it so I can have 5 great. You know.
What was the question again?
The question is, what's it like listening to a Houston person recording? I mean, I asked you what it's like hearing them. You know, give me another flavor.
I don't know. Listening to Houston person play puts a big smile on my soul.
That was great. I actually have a question. Well, do you think it's important for someone like Houston to connect with the younger musicians? One of the things like I think in his period it was all more organic and grassroots. So if you, as a young tenor, wanted to go out and meet him and possibly follow him around and learn from him, so many greats. That's how it happened.
Yeah.
But that seems lost now because of the scene, like the disconnect and the disjointed. It's much harder. Does he have a responsibility to the music? Not putting it on him, but I'm curious how you feel about that.
Do you want to ask it or just say
So,
just
do
talk?
you want me to say, do older musicians have a responsibility to bring in younger musicians? That's a good question. Do older jazz musicians have responsibility to educate and mentor younger jazz musicians?
I think it goes both ways. I think it's more important for the curiosity to be there in the younger musician and for them to take advantage of the fact that somebody that they can learn from is still alive and that they still have the opportunity to spend time with them. You know, I've seen and heard a few younger musicians who always try to look up older musicians when they go into a different town, when they're touring across America, for example. They'll look them up and they'll ask them if they can have lunch with them and talk to them. But you know, certainly that kind of connection that is not as prevalent as it used to be because of this. We don't have the scene that we used to have 40 years ago. So it's harder to do, but it's well worth it. And you know, when I was younger, I didn't want to. You know, I'll tell you the truth. I didn't understand Ben Webster and Coleman Hawkins. It took me years to understand that that's what that was, you know. And so a lot of people might not be ready to hear, you know, something that Houston has to say. But it's incredibly valuable, and I would urge anybody that wants to understand anything about music or the business to go and you know, try to reach out to him.
Great interview, Craig.
Yeah,
Incredible.
amazing.
Incredible. Great job.
Thank you.
We gotta bring Anthony in,
Yeah,
but
one of the differences I see in blues and jazz is the blues musicians, even the younger ones, they get on and jam with the older ones.
That's because they're all playing in B flat.
And I don't, but I don't see that so much in jazz.
You know, it's prevalent in blues, like on the maybe regional